zombie apocalypse author Camille Picott. Welcome to the Unabridged Audiobook of Red Virus, Book 1 of Zommunist Invading. If you enjoy the free audiobooks I offer on my channel, please like and subscribe to my channel and tell all your friends. Thanks so much, and I hope you enjoy the adventure.
Red Virus, Zommunist Invading, Book 1. Written by Camille Picott. Read by Al Kessel. Prologue. Best Friends. Dal tapped on the dark bedroom window with his finger. Rain sluiced down on his head in a cold barrage as he waited for his best friend to answer. The bedroom window remained dark. Dal knocked again, shivering from the cold and wet. Water pooled around his bare feet on the muddy ground. He should have grabbed shoes. The chilly water dulled the throbbing in his face. Unfortunately, it didn't do shit for the pain in his ribcage. "Dal?" A pale face with dark, disheveled hair appeared. His best friend Leo threw open his bedroom window. "Dal? You okay?" "I couldn't stay at home." Dal had tried. He tried to go to bed with a throbbing body while the war between his parents waged in the living room. For over 3 hours, he'd tried. Their shouting was like scars in his ears. Dal wiped water from his eyes. It was water, not tears. Leo's mouth tightened as his eyes took in Dal's face. Dal had no idea what it looked like. Based on the amount of blood that had spurted from his nose, he probably looked like he took a header into a ditch. Except Leo would know it wasn't a ditch that had connected with Dal's face. "Come inside." Leo popped out the screen. Dal pushed up on the window ledge, feet squelching in the mud as he jumped. Leo switched on the light as Dal climbed inside. In the bottom bunk of the bed, Anton, Leo's little brother, muttered in his sleep and turned away from the light. Dal was thankful the younger boy could sleep through anything. He wanted to turn away from the light and hide his face. But Leo was his best friend. Leo knew the truth about Dal's dad. He didn't have to hide from him. Dal stood just inside the window, letting the lamplight illuminate him. His bloody nose, bruises, and the cuts were completely exposed. His ripped jeans and his muddy bare feet topped everything off. He let Leo see it all. Leo heaved a small, sad sigh, his shoulders sagging as he took in Dal's busted form. "What was it this time?" "Mom undercooked the rice." Thinking about his mom made him feel useless. He tried to defend her. He really did. The sound of her shouting, "Leave him alone, Dallas, you hear me?" still echoed in his head. His father's drunken fury came between Dal and his mom. Every single time. Leo went to his hamper. Pulling out a still damp towel, he tossed it to Dal. Even though it was used, Dal pressed it to his face and inhaled the clean scent of the detergent. It smelled like the Cecchino house. Happy, cheerful, safe. He didn't know what it was like to live in a house that smelled like those things. "Here." Leo tossed him a pair of flannel pants and a t-shirt. "Your sleeping bag is under the bottom bunk. You want anything to eat?" In truth, Dal was starving. He hadn't eaten since lunch. He'd only gotten 2 bites of rice into his mouth before his old man went apeshit. But the memory of the bruise forming on his mother's right cheekbone and the darkening circle around her left eye left him with an upset stomach. "Nah, I'm fine." Leo switched off the light and climbed onto the top bunk. "Should I set the alarm clock for 5? Yeah. That would give Dal enough time to get home and back into his bed before his old man woke up. It would also get him out of the house before Anton woke up and before any of the other Cecchino family members barged into Leo's room. He didn't want them to see him like this. Not ever. Especially Lena. He didn't want Mr. Cecchino, Mrs. Cecchino, or Nona to see him either. But most especially, Lena. Dal changed into the dry clothes and returned the towel to the hamper. Then he draped his wet clothes on Leo's desk chair. He'd have to put those back on in the morning when he went home. Then he pulled the sleeping blanket out from under the bunk bed and crawled inside. It smelled just as good as the towel. "Night," Leo said. "Sorry your old man is an asshole." "One day, I'm going to kill him," Dal whispered back. "You will. When you're older and bigger, you'll kick his ass." Dal's throat tightened with emotion. Leo always had his back, no matter what. "Thanks, Leo. Anytime. Night, man." Night. Chapter 1. Breakfast. 12 years later. It was still dark when the alarm clock blared in his ear. Dal groaned and smacked the top of the clock to shut it off. He stared at the dark ceiling, blinking grit out of his eyes. It was 4:30 in the morning. He'd been up late studying for his statistics class. What time had he gone to bed anyway? He couldn't remember. As tired as he was, the day's long to-do list hit him like a splash of cold water. It scrolled through his brain. Wake up, finish studying for his statistics test, get Lena and Anton to school, hit the apple orchard with Leo and Mr. Cecchino, drive to the junior college for his math, English, and communication classes, hustle over to the radio station for his janitorial job, and possibly devise a way to bump into the studio president and introduce himself. Then, home to study. Someday, when he was finished with school and he had a morning show DJ job, he wouldn't have to cram 36 hours into a 24-hour day. His feet hit the cold floor of the converted utility room. Across from his bed was a chest of drawers and a bookshelf stacked with school books. Besides his car, everything he owned was in that dresser and on that bookshelf. He shucked off his T-shirt and changed into his black jeans and blue denim work shirt. The long sleeves would protect him from the bugs and sharp branches in the orchard. He pushed back the curtain sewn for him by Nona Cecchino. The thick cotton separated his tiny sanctuary from the rest of the utility room. Shoving his feet into his Converse, he walked past the washer and dryer and into the kitchen. Dal was satisfied to find the kitchen empty. It was hard to beat Nona Cecchino into the kitchen. He had to get up at 4:30 if he wanted Nona to have hot coffee when she woke up. Once the coffee pot was brewing, he straddled a kitchen chair and spread out his statistics book and notebook in front of him. He flipped to a page of problems and began to work through them. "Dallas?" Nona Cecchino shuffled into the kitchen a few minutes later, pink curlers in her gray hair. Pink flannel pajamas covered a lean figure. She was the matriarch of the Italian Cecchino family. She surveyed Dal at the kitchen table through the black-rimmed glasses perched on the end of her nose. "Morning, Nona." "What are you doing up so early?" "Studying. I have a test today." "But you studied until 1 in the morning." Dal shrugged without reply. Nona beamed at him. "If only my Anton had your work ethic." Dal did his best not to react to the compliment, even though it filled him up more than a warm meal ever could. "I'll cook your breakfast." Nona poured 2 generous cups of coffee, plopping one in front of Dal. The creamer and bowl of sugar followed the coffee cup. "A young man who works as hard as you do needs a proper breakfast." "Thanks, Nona." Dal dropped 2 lumps of sugar into his coffee, followed by a healthy pour of cream. He loved when Nona Cecchino cooked for him, though it made him self-conscious. She treated him like one of her grandkids, even though he was technically a guest in the Cecchino house. Not only did they let him live here for free, but they never thought twice about letting him eat their food either. Within minutes, bacon was frying in Nona's cast-iron pan. The crack of eggshells filled the quiet morning as she dropped them into a pan beside the bacon. A minute later, slices of bread went into the toaster. By the time Dal finished 2 pages of practice math, Nona set steaming plates of eggs and bacon onto the table. "Morning, Nona." Mr. Cecchino yawned as he entered the kitchen. In his mid-50s, the man was lean like his mother from a lifetime of hard work. His dark hair and mustache were streaked with a generous amount of gray. Like Dal, he was already dressed in his work clothes. The orchards were bursting with apples. There was a long day of labor ahead of them. "Get your breakfast before it gets cold," Nona replied by way of greeting. Mr. Cecchino winked at Dal. "Yes, Nona." He grabbed a plate and sat down across from Dal. "How's the studying going, son?" "Good." Dal closed the book and set it on the floor with his notebook. "I just wanted to get in one more study session before my test today." "You know, it's okay to skip a day in the orchard if you need more study time." Mr. Cecchino heaped a generous portion of eggs and bacon onto his plate, along with a few slices of toast. No way would Dal ever skip a day in the orchard. He knew the orchard didn't bring in the money it used to. The proliferation of apple farms in the area had driven down prices in recent years. Dal's own family, his biological family, suffered from the glut as much as the Cecchino family. "Nah." Dal shot a mischievous grin at Leo as his best friend stomped into the kitchen. "Who will keep Leo from slacking off if I'm not there?" Leo, still blinking sleep from his eyes, had enough wherewithal to register the insult. "Did someone order a pot of coffee poured in his lap?" Mr. Cecchino chuckled and helped himself to another scoop of eggs. Nona added a platter of toast to the table as the twins, Anton and Lena, appeared in the kitchen. Lena's dark brown hair was pulled into a side ponytail. Friendship bracelets woven by her friends adorned both wrists. She wore tight black pants and neon-colored leg warmers that were all the rage these days. Her baggy fluorescent pink t-shirt, which was the same color as her leg warmers, was knotted on one side. She might not dance anymore, but it was impossible to miss her dancer's legs in those tight pants. Dal did his best not to notice. "Morning, Nona." Lena gave Nona a hug before sliding into a chair at the table. She elbowed Dal. "You look like you got a good night's sleep." He elbowed her back. "Were you planning to walk to school today?" She grinned good-naturedly at him before filling her plate with food. Anton had the same dark brown hair as his twin sister. Sheathed in his letterman's jacket, he sauntered into the kitchen and made straight for the food. "What? No kiss for your grandmother today? You're getting too good for us now?" Nona waved a butter knife in Anton's direction. Anton made a show of rolling his eyes as he obediently kissed Nona's cheek. "Did that group confirm their reservation?" Leo asked his father. These days, his friend was all business. Mr. Cecchino nodded. "A group of 8. They'll arrive on Friday. We need to go to the cabin to get things cleaned up." A silent current of relief ran through the breakfast table. No one said anything, but everyone knew a hunting party of 8 was a good thing. On top of helping his dad with the apple farm, Leo ran guided hunting trips on the family property. They supplemented the depressed prices of apples. "We'll go up this afternoon after we get finished in the orchard." Leo slid a narrow-eyed look of irritation at his younger brother. "You can help. I'll pick you up after school." "What?" Anton was indignant. "You know I have practice." "Please." Leo rolled his eyes with disgust. "You need to focus on real-world stuff, not high school games," said the former high school star quarterback and football captain. Dal exchanged a look with Lena before shifting his attention to his food, silently preparing himself for the inevitable argument between the two brothers. "High school games?" Anton's voice went up several decibels. "You didn't think it was a simple game when you were team captain senior year." "I've grown up since then," Leo replied. He ignored Lena's abrupt coughing fit. "Football was a distraction. You're such a hypocrite. Just because you messed up your arm and lost your scholarship." "That was for the best," Leo said coldly. "Football was a childish dream. I should have been focused on important things, like helping Dad grow our hunting business. That's what puts food on this table." "Oh, now you're a business expert? You—" "Enough." Mr. Cecchino silenced the argument with a single word. "Anton goes to football practice. We'll head up to the cabin when he gets home. There's enough work in the orchard to keep us busy until then." Anton flipped a piece of toast in the air, throwing a look of triumph at Leo. Leo narrowed an angry scowl at his little brother before returning to his breakfast. Dal suppressed a sad sigh. This angry version of Leo had been in place ever since Jennifer dumped him and Mrs. Cecchino had died. Both had happened at the end of their senior year, 2.5 years ago. It all happened right before Leo was supposed to head off to Cal Berkeley with a full-ride football scholarship. His life had been turned upside down in a matter of weeks, and he'd never fully recovered from it. "Well," Nona added a slather of apple jam to her toast. "I, for one, am excited about the hunting group. I've been working on some new recipes." "Your recipes don't need work, Nona," Lena said. "Everyone loves your beef stew." "Who wants to make the same thing all the time?" Nona replied. "That gets boring. I'm going to make venison stew one of the nights." "Venison?" Leo frowned at Nona. "Beef stew is everyone's favorite." "They'll get beef stew," Nona said, "but they'll get venison stew too. We've got that buck in the freezer that needs to be eaten." Tension leached out of the table as Nona continued to rattle out the details of the things she planned to cook for the hunting group. Dal was just polishing off the last of his eggs when Lena leaned in his direction. "Do you have class in Rossi this afternoon?" Even though Lena's voice had been pitched for his ears, talk at the table immediately ceased. Everyone looked at Lena. "What's in Rossi?" Nona said. "Got a hot date?" Anton asked. "Please," Lena scoffed. She popped a piece of bacon into her mouth. "There's an anti-nuke rally in the downtown plaza." "God," Anton rolled his eyes. "You and your stupid anti-nuke stuff." Lena's hackles went up. "Mom didn't think it was stupid. She knew the Russians might make their move any day." "It'll never happen," Anton proclaimed. "We'd turn their whole country into a nuclear waste zone if they ever tried." "Have you ever read the news?" Lena stabbed a finger at the pile of newspapers stacked on the empty chair at the head of the table. that had been Mrs. Cecchino's chair before cancer had taken her. "Our president is making jokes about dropping nukes on Russia. Chernenko is dying. Gorbachev is next in line, and he—" "Enough!" Mr. Cecchino rumbled. "You're going to be late to school. Everyone out. Help Nona clear the table." Lena and Anton fell silent at their father's command, but continued to glare at one another. Anton snatched his empty plate off the table and stalked across the room to deposit it in the sink. Lena waited until the front door slammed shut behind her twin. "So, will you give me a ride to the rally after school?" she asked Dal, no longer bothering to lower her voice. Dal shot a quick look at Mr. Cecchino. Only when the older man nodded did he reply to Lena. "Sure. I'll pick you up in front of the school at 3. "Thanks, Dal." Lena gave him a quick smile of thanks, ignoring the silent exchange that had taken place between him and her father. Everyone bustled around the kitchen, helping Nona clear the table. Mr. Cecchino pulled Dal aside after Lena and Leo headed out the front door. "I heard the dance academy is holding auditions this week." He pulled a newspaper clipping out of his pocket, unfolding it so Dal could read it. "Rossi Dance Academy. Auditions for Christmas recital. New dancers welcome." "Do me a favor and mention it to Lena this afternoon." Mr. Cecchino folded the clipping and passed it to Dal. "She won't snap your head off for mentioning it." Dal took the clipping. "Sure thing, Mr. Cecchino." The older man smiled fondly at him, giving his shoulder a squeeze. "You're a good kid, Dallas. Mrs. Cecchino loved you like a son." He left Dal with these words, following his kids out the front door. Dal stared after Mr. Cecchino, throat tight. He slid the dance clipping into his wallet, understanding just how much emotion rode on the 2-by-3-inch piece of newspaper. Outside, Lena and Anton were already in Dal's VW Beetle. It had taken Dal 7 years of delivering newspapers, from 6th grade all the way to his senior year in high school, to save up enough money to buy the blue vehicle with peeling paint on the hood. It was his most prized possession. It was a reminder that anything, even a 12-year-old's dream of owning his own car, could be accomplished with hard work. One day, he'd have a brand new sports car. One day, he'd have his own morning DJ show. He just had to keep his head down and work his ass off. Leo and Mr. Cecchino headed into the orchard while Dal slid into the front seat of the Beetle. It was his first job to get Lena and Anton to school every day. He'd returned to work in the orchard after dropping off the twins. Lena was in the back seat, pointedly ignoring her brother. In her hands was a Walkman, her portable cassette player. The headphones clamped over her ears drowned out any snide remarks that might come her way from Anton. "She's listening to those stupid Russian language tapes. Again!" Anton rolled his eyes, tugging at his letterman's jacket. He said it like it was a surprise. Like Lena didn't listen to her mother's old Russian language tapes every day. Dal ignored the comment and fired up the car. Depeche Mode blared out of the car's speakers. This was the real reason Dal loved his Beetle so much. It might not be much to look at, but the previous owner had put in a state-of-the-art sound system. Dal could lose himself in the music every time he drove. "You ready for the game on Friday?" he asked Anton as he rolled down the driveway of the Cecchino farm. "Of course." Anton shifted his shoulders, causing the light to glint off the various sport pins that adorned his letterman's jacket. "Me and my buddies are going to kick some ass." "Too bad your dad is going to have to miss the game." Mr. Cecchino never missed a game if he could help it. But with the hunting party coming on Friday afternoon, he wouldn't have a choice. "There will be other games," Anton shrugged. "It's not like he hasn't seen me play tons of times." But it was senior year. There were only a handful of games left, and it didn't look like Anton was going to get a scholarship like Leo had. His football games were coming to an end, but Dal didn't say this. The beetle rolled off the hard-packed dirt onto the black top of the main road. As he accelerated down the 2-lane country road, he couldn't help flicking a glance at the apple farm that bordered the Cecchino farm. His eyes picked out the small country house with a sagging front porch. The window curtains were backlit with soft yellow light, a sign that his parents were up. Dal hadn't spoken to his mom and dad since freshman year of high school. Even though they were technically neighbors and shared a fence line, they were separated by many acres of apples. That made it possible to coexist without seeing them. It had almost been exactly a year since Dal had laid eyes on his father. It had been at the local cider mill. He and Leo had each driven down a truckload of apples to the plant after a harvest. Mr. Granger sold apples to the same mill. He'd driven up while Dal and Leo had been unloading their apple bins. Mr. Granger had looked at Dal only once. He'd been wearing his favorite black hat, a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. Their eyes met over the bins of apples. And that had been it. Mr. Granger looked away and drove on to unload his truck, never again turning in his son's direction. Dal supposed being ignored was better than having the shit kicked out of him. Even so, it still bothered him a year later. Dal could picture the moment perfectly. His dad's scruffy face framed by the window of his sad brown truck with that damn cigarette. "Fuck him," Leo had said. "You don't need him." "Yeah, fuck him," Dal had replied. "Fucking drunk asshole." And that had been that. The two boys never spoke of the moment, and Dal hadn't seen his father since. "Fuck those guys," Anton said, echoing Leo's words from a year ago. "You don't owe them a thing." He cranked up the volume on the radio. Depeche Mode transitioned into level 42. Dal responded by shifting his gaze from his parents' farm back to the road. Anton had answered the door the night Dal had been kicked out of his house. 2 cracked ribs had made it impossible to crawl in through Leo's window like he usually did. The bloody nose and black eye had been enough for Mrs. Cecchino to declare that Dal was moving in with them. He'd been with the Cecchinos ever since. Dal would never say it, but he loved the fact that Mr. Cecchino never missed a football game if he could help it. He admired the way Mr. Cecchino took care of his family. He was everything Dal's father wasn't. He hoped that if he spent enough time studying Mr. Cecchino, he could be like him someday, and not like his father. "See ya, bro," Anton slugged him in the side of the arm as Dal pulled into the parking lot of Bastapul High. He jumped out of the car and beelined for a group of teenage boys in matching Letterman jackets. Lena took her time, meticulously rolling the wire around her headphones before tucking them and her Walkman into her backpack. Unlike her brother, Lena didn't have a group of friends waiting for her. She spent too much time studying Russian on her breaks to have time for friends. It had been like that ever since her mom died. "See you after school?" Lena waited for his nod of confirmation. "Cool, thanks. And thanks for not being a dick like my real brothers." She slid out of the Beetle, slinging her backpack over one shoulder. Dal rolled out of the parking lot, heading back to the Cecchino farm. He watched Lena in his rearview mirror until she was out of sight. Chapter 2. Apples. Fucking ungrateful punk! Leo glared at the hump of Dal's blue beetle and its plume of dust. One of these days, Anton would get what was coming to him. After senior year, he'd have to finally grow up, like Leo had to grow up after their mom died. He shouldered the canvas apple bag Nona made for him. It resembled a backpack, except it was worn with the opening in the front. It could hold up to 50 pounds of apples. The design made it easy for the Cecchino family to drop apples into it while standing on the ladder. Mr. Cecchino hustled by him, a wooden ladder under one arm. He whistled as he went. His good cheer soured Leo even further. His bad mood was compounded as he stared out at the long rows of apple trees. 296 acres of apples, to be exact. Leo stomped down to the far end of a row, rubber boots swishing in the wet grass. It was not even 7:30 in the morning, yet already humid. It was going to be hot today. West County, California, was known for the Gravenstein apple. Most of the Cecchino apples were sold to a local cider mill. The rest of them went to local markets and restaurants. Sometimes, if they had a heavy crop, Mr. Cecchino drove to San Francisco and sold apples out of the back of his truck to tourists. Looking up at the branches laden with red and green speckled fruit, Leo had a feeling a San Francisco street corner was in his future. He picked a tree at the very end of the row and settled his wooden ladder into place. Then he scaled to the top of the tree and began to pick. Apple picking was a skill. For starters, you never picked just one apple at a time, at least not if you actually wanted to finish before all the fruit rotted on the tree. You always picked 2 or 3 per hand. Over the years, Leo had developed an adept eye for picking. He could survey a section of the tree and instinctively know the fastest way to remove all the apples. The trick was to lean against the ladder with the lowest part of the body and leave the hands free. That made it possible to pick with both hands instead of just one. He'd nearly finished 2 trees when Dal returned from town. His best friend joined him at the far end of the orchard with a cheerful smile. "The mustard still has a few weeks left," Dal said, gesturing to the tall clusters of yellow flowers scattered around the edge of the orchard. "I'll have to try and remember to pick some for Nona later." Nona loved mustard flowers. Leo was still in a dark mood. "How do you do it?" "Do what?" Dal settled his ladder into place. "Aren't you sick of them?" "Sick of what?" Dal's rubber boots thudded against the ladder as he climbed to the top of the tree with his apple bag. "Apples! Aren't you sick of them? I mean, we've been doing this shit since we were kids." Dal plunged his arms into the top boughs of the tree. "I like being outside." What Leo really wanted was a good old-fashioned bitch fest. He should have known Dal wouldn't take the bait. Dal wasn't one for complaining, not even when his old man beat the shit out of him. Maybe that's why he was perpetually pleasant. He didn't live with his old man and his batshit crazy mom anymore. Compared to the hell Dal had grown up with, the apple orchard was a fucking paradise. Maybe that was Leo's problem. His life had been too good. So good that the simple fate of an apple farmer felt like a curse. He should be playing ball at UC Berkeley. He should be partying at frat houses with Jennifer in his arms. Instead, she was off enjoying a perfect life at UC Riverside, while he was stuck on an apple farm. Even knowing his so-called injury had been the best thing for the family did nothing to improve his mood. It was Anton's fault. The little punk had no idea how good he had it. "Careful, son." Leo had been so engrossed in his own bad mood that he hadn't heard his dad walking down the road. "You shouldn't be lifting your bad arm over your head like that. Dr. Kane said there's still a chance for it to heal if you don't strain it." Even Dal paused at the comment. His head popped out of the dark leaves of the tree. "Sorry, Dad," Leo muttered. The proud smile on his dad's face made him want to hit something. Why the hell his dad was proud of a son who did nothing but pick apples was beyond Leo. "I'll be one row over. Just leave the ones too hard for your arm to reach." "Okay, Dad." Leo had no intention of leaving any apples on his trees, but it was better to play along and preserve the carefully constructed illusion. Over the top of Mr. Cecchino's wide straw hat, Leo's eyes met Dal's. He knew the truth. Leo was pretty sure of it. Dal had never spoken of it, but his friend missed very little. And the way he looked at Leo at times like this made him think Dal had figured him out. Leo was grateful Dal never confronted him on it. Putting his decision into words made Leo want to break things. Mr. Cecchino shouldered his ladder and disappeared through a gap in the trees. "Where's the hunting party from?" "San Francisco." Dal let out a whistle. "Nice. Your ads are paying off. Pretty soon, you'll have groups up here every weekend. You'll have to hire guys to pick apples for you." His words eased the tension that had plagued Leo since his eyes first opened this morning. Leo was sure that was calculated on Dal's part. The hunting business was the only thing that kept Leo from totally losing his shit most days. "You think so?" His hands darted in and out of the tree, snatching apples and depositing them into the pouch hanging from his shoulders. "Hell yeah, man. You're going to have a booming business. I know it. You should come up to the cabin this weekend. I'm sure there's a pig up there with your name on it." "Nah." Dal shook his head. "I'll stay here with Nona. I have to study. Besides, someone has to make sure Anton and Lena come out and pick their share of apples." He flashed an easy grin at Leo through the trees. Leo snorted. "Good luck with that. There's no hope of Anton doing his fair share of anything until after he graduates. Yeah, he might try to sneak away and go hunting with you if I don't put a leash on him." Despite the animosity toward his little brother, Leo chuckled at the mental image of Dal putting a leash on him. It would serve the little shit right. "Seriously, man," Dal said. "Word is going to get around. I mean, San Francisco. No one has ever come that far to hunt here. They'll spread the word. All the hunting circles in the South and East Bay will know about Nona's cooking and your tracking skills by the end of summer." Dal's optimism lightened Leo's load. He glided down the ladder with a full bag of apples, dumping the fruit into one of the big plastic bins his father had placed up and down the rows. As he climbed back up into the tree for the next 50 pounds of apples, he couldn't help but feel optimistic about the upcoming hunt. Maybe Dal was right. Maybe word about his guided hunting trips would get around. Maybe he had a real shot at saving the family from bankruptcy. Chapter 3. Ex-Ballerina. Despite the fact that he always wore a broad-rimmed hat, the tip of Dal's nose was sunburned by the time he finished working in the orchard. He'd filled 10 bins of apples that day. Each bin held 1,000 pounds, meaning he'd single-handedly picked 10,000 pounds of apples. "It's too hot," Leo said to him as he slid the pallet jack beneath the last bin. "They're ripening too fast." "I don't have to work on Saturday," Dal said. "I'll pick with Anton and Lena while you guys are with the hunters. We'll get all the apples in." The resentment that always rode Leo's shoulders slackened. "Thanks, Dal." He glanced at his watch. "You'd better go or you'll be late to class. I'll get the bins into the barn." "Thanks, man." Dal had just enough time to shower and shovel a few peanut butter and jelly sandwiches into his mouth, courtesy of Nona. Then he was back in his car and speeding to Sebastopol High. Lena stood on the curb, waiting for him. The headphones were on her ears, portable cassette player in her hand with its Russian language tape. "Hey." She slid into the front seat. She gave him a smile, but didn't take off her headphones. "Hey." Dal hustled out of the parking lot. Minutes later, he was on the freeway, driving east toward Rossi. He poked Lena in the arm. She glanced at him before sliding the headphones around her neck. "Yeah?" "Your dad asked me to tell you something. Don't shoot the messenger, okay?" Her eyes narrowed. "What is it?" Dal braced himself for the unpleasant task at hand. He'd rather pick another bin of apples. "The dance studio is holding auditions for the Christmas recital." He picked up the folded newspaper clipping from the dashboard and handed it to her. Lena snorted. "The Soviets could attack any time, and all my dad cares about is a stupid dance recital?" Dal said nothing. They both knew it was more than a stupid dance recital. Before her mom died, Lena had been one of the best ballerinas in the Rossi Dance Academy. She was more talented than girls who were 2 and 3 years older. "Mom cared about all the crap happening in the world," Lena said. "You know the Russians have almost 40,000 nukes? 40,000, Dal! She knew how precarious everything is. Dad doesn't take the Soviet threat seriously. He never took Mom seriously when she was alive either." Lena knew full well her father had nearly been crushed under the pressure of running the farm and taking care of Mrs. Cecchino. Her illness and subsequent death had devastated everyone. Dal chose his words carefully. One of the few things he'd learned from his biological father was that once spoken, words couldn't be taken back. "It's because he loves your mom so much that he wants you to keep dancing." That was the truth of it. Everyone knew nothing made Mrs. Cecchino's eyes light up more than the sight of her daughter on center stage of a ballet recital. "It's his way of honoring your mom." All the fight went out of Lena. She put her headphones back on and resumed listening to her language lesson. Dal poked her again. "What?" She didn't look at him or take off the headphones. "You actually learning anything from those tapes?" He had yet to hear her speak a word of Russian, and she'd been listening to those things for over 2 years. "Здравствуйте, добрый день," she replied. He was impressed. "What does that mean?" "Hello, good afternoon. Satisfied?" He didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he just nodded. She looked away, staring out the passenger side window. He gave her space, turning up the music on his radio. Music always made everything better. It's the main reason he wanted to work in radio. As he pulled onto the off-ramp that led into downtown Rossi, Lena took off her headphones. "I wish you didn't always sound like a Chinese sage every time you open your mouth. It's really annoying. I wish you'd say stupid shit like the rest of us." He gave her a sidelong glance. "Where I grew up, saying something stupid got you a fist in the face." She knew that. The entire Cecchino family knew it, though most of the time they were kind enough not to bring it up. Guilt flashed across Lena's face. Her eyes widened as she looked at him. "I'm sorry, Dal. I shouldn't have said that. It's okay." He found it impossible to be mad at her most days, just as he found it impossible not to notice how pretty her eyes were. "No, it's not. It was a shitty thing to say." She let out a breath and hugged her knees to her chest. "I just can't do it, you know? All it does is make me think of her." He knew she'd switched topics and was talking about the dancing. "I know, Lena." He knew the anti-nuke rallies and the Russian language tapes also made her think about her mom, but for some reason she'd attached a different sentiment to it. "How long does the rally last?" "I don't know, an hour or two. After class, I have to clean the radio station. I should be finished around 8. Can you pick me up at the coffee shop on 4th? "Sure." Dal pulled up a few blocks west of the downtown plaza. The street was already clogged with people heading to the rally. "Did you bring a sign?" "Nah. There's usually extra ones around I can grab. Or maybe today they'll let me be on megaphone duty." A brief grin softened her face. "I love shouting in that thing." He chuckled. "Have fun." She jumped out of the car. Before closing the door, she leaned down to look at him. "I'm sorry for being a jerk." "It's okay. See you later?" "Yep. 8 o'clock at the coffee shop on 4th. Bye, Dal." "Bye, Lena." Chapter 4. Charter Bus. Leo loved the smell of fresh-cut grass and the feel of the sun-drenched bleachers against his hands. They were reminders of the best days of his life. He paced in the shade of the bleachers, eating dried cinnamon apples out of a Ziploc bag. Nona always turned the ugliest of the fruit into apple chips. Despite the fact that Leo despised apples, Nona's chips were to die for. Anton and all his varsity friends were out on the field, running plays under Coach Brown's supervision. The little bastard didn't know how good he had it. Leo would never, ever admit to sneaking away from the farm early to watch Anton play varsity football. He was secretly proud of his little brother. He was a damn good quarterback, even if he couldn't throw with the same distance and precision as Leo had. Watching his brother took Leo back to a time when he was somebody. Varsity quarterback, team captain, homecoming king, scholarship winner, future UC Berkeley student, Jennifer's boyfriend. Life had been so damn good, right up until the moment when it wasn't anymore. He'd gone from being on top of the world to the bottom of the dog pile in the blink of an eye. He sighed, chomping on the last of the apple chips and shoving the empty Ziploc into his pocket. He knew he needed to let go and move on. He knew he couldn't get on with his life if all he did was dwell in the past. It was just so damn hard. Anton's throw sailed 40 yards down the field, a perfect arch that landed squarely in the hands of the receiver. Nice. A charter bus pulled up on the far end of the football field. The image of a long greyhound was painted on the side. What was a charter bus doing at the high school? Tour companies sometimes brought people up this way for an authentic California experience in a local apple orchard. Tourists actually paid money to spend the afternoon in an orchard, picking apples. It was a big fat joke as far as Leo was concerned. Maybe he'd figure out a way to capitalize on that idea. Except there was no apple orchard around here. The tour bus must have taken a wrong turn somewhere. The country roads around Bastopol could get confusing. Coach Brown would set the driver straight. The bus door opened. A guy in military fatigues stepped out. That was weird. There wasn't a military base anywhere around here. Coach Brown crossed the field, heading in the direction of the guy in the fatigues. Leo watched him wave a friendly hand. Then, something strange happened. The guy in fatigues raised a weapon. The weapon fired. Coach Brown staggered back, clutching his chest. The soldier fired a second time. This time, Leo saw blood spurt out of Coach Brown's body. More men in fatigues swarmed out of the bus and poured across the field. They were armed with multiple weapons, and they fired directly at Anton and the rest of the varsity football team. "Anton!" Leo's shout was lost in the chatter of gunfire. That's when he caught sight of the backside of the fatigue uniforms. A bright red star, sickle, and hammer was emblazoned there. Leo stood frozen in shock. Russian soldiers? Here? On American soil? Several varsity students fell under the onslaught of gunfire. Their screams jarred Leo into action. Anton, his brother, his baby brother. Leo saw everything in the blink of an eye. It was a knack he'd developed while playing football. He could assess a scene in less than a second and make snap decisions. Pressure made him thrive. He saw everything clearly, and it terrified him. If he ran across the field to help, the most he could do was get his hands on a gun and defend his little brother. But they'd still be outnumbered and outgunned, with no way out. What they needed was to get the fuck out of here. It was the only way to survive. Turning his back on the field was the hardest thing Leo had ever done. But he knew it was the only way. He tore out from under the bleachers, sprinting for his truck. Damn it. He hadn't wanted Anton to see him, so he parked it a block away near the front of the high school. Leo's boots pounded on the pavement. He ran hard, ironically grateful to all the years in the apple orchard. They left him strong and fit. He reached the Chevy truck he'd bought his junior year. The blue paint gleamed from the waxing he'd given it just last week. As he reached the door, 3 soldiers boiled out of the school. Half a dozen students ran before them, scattering in all directions as they screamed in terror. Leo got his first good look at the Soviet weapons. Every man was armed with 2 guns. A machine gun was in one hand, but in the other was some type of dart gun. Red darts rested in a long magazine sticking out from the top of the gun. What the hell was in those darts? The Soviets alternated between weapons. Sometimes they fired bullets, sometimes they fired darts. If there was a method to what they did, Leo couldn't see what it was. Several students fell, shot from behind. The remaining ones ran away, 2 of them with darts in the backs of their necks. Leo jumped into his truck, fingers shaking as he jammed the keys into the ignition. He slammed his foot on the accelerator and tore down the street just as one of the Russians opened fire on him. Bullets thudded into the back of his truck. He was going away from the Russians, but that also meant he was going away from the football field. Leo reached the front of the school and made a hard left, heading around the block to get to the field from the other direction. "Hold on, Anton," he thought. "Don't do anything stupid before I get there." He tore around the school, dodging teachers, enemy soldiers, and kids. The streets were chaos. His only thought was to reach Anton. As soon as the field was in sight, he floored it. He drove onto the sidewalk, past the swimming pool, and over the concrete walkway around the track. He was nearly to the bleachers when a group of kids came running out of the concession stand. "Leo!" It was Anton, and he was with Bruce, Lars and Adam, 3 of his varsity friends. Leo bellowed with wordless relief. He slammed so hard on the brakes, the truck fishtailed. The smell of burned rubber filled the air. Adam was leaning heavily on Anton and Lars. He'd been shot in his upper torso. Blood stained the front of his varsity uniform, leaving a trail of blood behind him. 2 Soviets appeared on the far side of the bleachers. As soon as they saw Leo's truck, they shouted and ran towards them. Darts flew in their direction. A few of them plinked off the back of the truck. Lars barked as he was hit with a dart. "Fuck! I'm hit!" "Hurry!" Leo shouted. The boys heaved Adam into the back, then piled in after him. Lars scratched at the back of his neck, yanking out the dart that had lodged in his flesh. "Go!" Anton pounded on the side of the truck. "Go, Leo!" Tires squealed as Leo tore away from the bleachers, heading away from Bastapol High and the Soviet invaders.
If you're enjoying this story, be sure to check out Afterworld Apocalypse. This series combines the gritty dystopian future found in movies like Mad Max with the high-octane and memorable characters that you would find in movies like 28 Days Later. Available on Amazon, Kindle Unlimited, and select audiobook retailers. Thanks so much for tuning in. Now back to the show.
Chapter 5. Triage. Russians were here. Russians were here, on American soil. What the fuck? Lena would never let them hear the end of it. Leo barreled down a country road, the speedometer bouncing at the 100 mark as he sped home. The Soviets could attack at any time, his mom used to say. It will be World War III before we know it. "I thought it would be nukes," cried Bruce, an offensive tight end. "Shit, man, this is an invasion." His words carried through the small open window at the back of the truck cab. The boys were in a full-scale panic. To be honest, Leo wasn't doing much better. He held it together because there was no other choice. "I got hit by one of those darts. What the fuck is going to happen to me?" said Lars, one of the team linebackers. His voice was shrill with panic. "What do you think is in those things?" He scratched at the back of his neck where the dart had been. "Why the fuck is this happening, man?" "It's the Russians." Anton sat with Adam's head on his leg, pressing his hands against the other boy's wound. "I know it's the Russians!" Lars screamed. Anton banged on the top of the cab. "Drive faster!" he hollered. "We're going to lose Adam!" Leo's mouth tightened. The speedometer only went to 120. Screw it. He'd rather blow up the car than risk losing Adam. He pushed the accelerator all the way to the floor. Apple orchards blurred past on either side of them. Nona would know what to do. She'd survived the Nazis in Italy as a kid. She'd know how to help Adam. Dirt and grit sprayed up from the tires as Leo hit the dirt road and sped toward the Cecchino farm. "Hold on!" he shouted. From his periphery, he saw Anton bend over Adam in an effort to keep him from bouncing. The back end of the truck skidded sideways as Leo slammed on the brakes in front of the house. Lars jumped out of the back, yelling about Russians. Bruce stared, slack-jawed. He looked like shock was setting in. "Bruce!" Anton snapped. "Help me!" The other boy shook himself, turning to grab Adam's feet. Leo helped the 2 of them wrestle the bleeding boy out of the pickup. Adam was a big kid, an offensive lineman. He had to weigh at least 250 pounds. They had just gotten him to the ground when Mr. Cecchino appeared. His dad absorbed the scene in a single blink. The hysterical Lars, the bleeding Adam, and the disheveled state of Bruce and his sons. Rather than panic, a steely look overcame his features. "What happened?" he barked. "Russians," Leo said. "They're attacking." Mr. Cecchino's gaze tracked from Adam and back to his sons. "Have Nona patch him up. My truck is packed for the cabin. Take it and go. Don't leave until I get there. Leo, keys." Leo obeyed without thought, tossing his keys to his father. Mr. Cecchino caught the keys in midair. He spun on his boot, hustling toward Leo's pickup. "Where are you going?" Leo shouted. "I'm going to find Dal and your sister." Words died on Leo's tongue. Dal and Lena were in Rossi. His father slammed the truck door and sped down the road. He was gone in seconds, a trail of dirt drifting into the sky, the only sign of his passing. 1,000 thoughts swirled through Leo's head. How did his father intend to find Lena and Dal? If things were bad in Bastopol, they had to be 10 times worse in Rossi. It was a real city with over 50,000 people. It was nothing like the tiny town of Bastopol. What if the Soviets had... Leo shook himself. Focus. He had to focus. His father was gone. Lena and Dal were in Rossi. Adam was bleeding out in their driveway. Adam was the priority. "Come on." He hustled the boys into the house, Adam slung between them. Anton kicked the door open, calling, "Nona! Nona!" Their grandmother appeared in the kitchen doorway. Confusion creased her brow as she took in the bleeding teenage boy. Lars's hysterical shouts of, "The Russians are here!" echoed through the house. Nona's face set into a hard mask. "Bullet wound?" "Yeah," Leo said. God, Adam was one heavy guy. "Where's your father?" "He left for Rossi to find Lena and Dal." They lugged Adam into the kitchen. Leo swept an arm across the table, sending newspapers and a basket of napkins scattering to the floor. They laid Adam out on the table. "First aid kit," Nona snapped. She set to work with a pair of scissors, snipping off Adam's jersey. Leo tore through the house and threw open the cupboards in the utility room. He rifled frantically through the contents, flinging things to the floor in his search. Anton joined him, the two of them tearing through the cupboards in search of the first aid kit. Where the hell was the thing? It was in here somewhere. "Got it." Leo snatched up a small white metal box with a red cross on the front. He sprinted back into the kitchen with Anton at his heels. Lars came into the kitchen, eyes dilated with panic. "The Russians are here!" he shrilled. "They're attacking! They're killing us! They—" Nona delivered a stinging slap to his face. She delivered a second one for good measure, the force of each slap leaving a bright red mark on Lars's cheek. "You are among snipers now," she snarled at the big teenage linebacker. "Snipers remain cool and calm under pressure. No more screaming. Shut up and act like a man." Sniper. That was the family namesake. Cecchino in Italian translated to sniper. Leo's great-great-great-great-great-grandfather had fought in the Napoleonic Wars. He had been so damn good at shooting enemy soldiers that he'd eventually taken his moniker as a surname. Nona shoved Lars into a chair. He plunked down without a sound, eyes wide as he stared at her. "You," Nona stabbed a finger at Bruce. "Call all the parents and let them know you're safe." She snatched the first aid box out of Leo's hands. "Get me the grappa," she ordered, "and clean towels." Anton went for his father's liquor cabinet in the living room. Leo dashed back into the utility room for clean towels. Adam's groaning filled the house. By the time he returned to the kitchen, Nona had finished cutting open Adam's shirt. Blood gushed out on the table from his shoulder. "Leonardo, grab his ankles," she ordered. Nona grabbed the grappa bottle while Leo obediently grabbed Adam's ankles. Keeping one hand firmly pressed on Adam's shoulders, she pulled the cork out with her teeth. She upended the bottle, pouring it over Adam's shoulder. Adam yelped and jerked. "Hold him!" Nona snapped. Leo increased his grip on the boy's ankles. He stared at perfect new yellow Nike shoes that were now marred with blood. He would have killed to have shoes like that back in high school. "Bullet went clean through," Nona reported. "That's a good thing. I just have to stitch him up. Anthony, get the needle and thread from my sewing machine. Here, son, take a sip of this." She cradled Adam's head, lifting the grappa bottle to his lips. Leo watched his grandmother coax the boy into drinking several long swallows from the bottle. He remembered the time she'd caught him trying to sneak a sip out of his father's glass. She'd delivered a stinging slap to his bottom he'd never forget. "That's not for you, Leonardo. Grappa is for men, not boys." And here she was, pouring it down Adam's throat like it was cough syrup. Leo took that as a bad sign. Nona clearly wanted Adam drunk. Lars had slid from the chair to the floor, thick legs sprawled out in front of him. His eyes glazed as he watched Nona work. Sweat dripped down his temples, and his skin was pale. He looked sick, but Leo chalked it up to shock. Bruce was glued to the wall, attempting to get in touch with his and Lars's parents. No one was picking up on the other line, but he kept dialing. Nona dumped grappa onto her hands before taking the needle and thread from Anton. "Have you done this before?" Leo asked. Nona never looked up as she threaded her needle. "I survived the Nazis in Italy, Leonardo. You didn't do that without learning a few things along the way. Anthony, hold his shoulders while I work." No one said a word as Anton moved into place. Leo watched his grandmother in awe. Nona had cleaned up plenty of family cuts and scrapes over the years, but he'd never seen her like this before. She was perfectly focused, her hands rock steady and sure in their work. If the massive amount of blood and twitching, moaning teenage boy bothered her, she didn't let it show. "Now flip him over." She snipped the thread, and she finished the first set of stitches. Adam groaned as Anton and Leo flipped him over. His limbs were loose from the grappa. "This is just a scrape," Nona told him. "You'll be fine. I've seen much worse." Nona never spoke about her childhood in Italy during World War II. Leo resolved to ask her about it someday, when he wasn't busy holding down the ankles of a teenage boy on the kitchen table. "There, he'll be fine." Nona made the last snip of her scissors. Across the front and back of Adam's shoulders were neat lines of stitches. Nona poured the grappa over the skin, washing away the last of the blood. Then she grabbed a roll of gauze out of the first aid kit. "Help him sit up, boys." Leo and Anton could do very few things without arguing. This moment turned out to be no exception. "Leave his feet on the table," Leo snapped as Anton attempted to rotate the teenage linebacker. "It will be easier for him to sit if his legs are over the side." "Don't you know anything? You have to keep legs elevated when someone is hurt." "What are you talking about? His—" "Boys," Nona's voice cracked. "Sit him up now." Anton grudgingly moved beside Leo. They levered Adam into a sitting position. Nona wrapped the wound in gauze. When she finished, Leo and Anton moved Adam to the sofa in the living room. There was a brief moment of silence. Anton and Leo stared at one another. The weight of the Soviet attack hung between them. "Dad said to get to the cabin," Leo said at last. "Pack a bag. We leave in 20. Anton nodded. "I'll tell Nona." He paused, halfway back to the kitchen. What about Adam, Lars, and Bruce? Leo hesitated. We take them with us. 20 minutes later, they loaded a half-conscious Adam into the cab of the pickup truck. Nona sat in the front with him, a small suitcase between her feet. Anton, Bruce, and Lars headed into the back with all the gear. It was packed full of supplies for the hunt, plenty of guns, ammo, food, and camping supplies. Lars's foot slipped on his first attempt to climb up the back. Leo grabbed the back of his shirt to keep him from landing on his ass. You okay, man? Lars blinked. His eyes were red. His skin was pale and damp with perspiration. I feel like shit, he muttered. That's when Leo noticed the puckering welts along the back of Lars's neck. It's where the Russian darts had hit him. The edges of the wound were black with the beginning of an infection. Leo weighed the wisdom of telling Lars what he saw. He decided to keep the information to himself until they reached the cabin. They couldn't do anything for him until they got there anyway. Anton sprang into the back of the truck, holding out a hand to Lars. Come on, man. Lars grasped his hand and let Anton help him up. He sprawled on top of the gear bags, groaning. What's wrong with him? Bruce asked, frowning as he settled into place. He'll be fine. Leo hopped into the cab and fired up the truck. You guys ready back there? Anton slapped his hand on the top of the cab. We're good. Roll out, man. Chapter 6. Invasion. Dal was just entering the Rossi Junior College campus when he saw the first armed soldier. Dressed in military fatigues, the man stepped out of a sleek Greyhound bus at the front of campus. He moved on to the vast lawn area between the street and the classrooms, a weapon in either hand. The students lounging on the grass didn't give him a second thought. Dal was the only one who stopped dead at the sight of him. Unease hit him, a persistent tug deep in his belly. The same feeling overcame him throughout his childhood. It was a sensation that preceded one of his father's violent rages. Dal had long ago learned not to question the feeling. Once, in his senior year, he'd woken in the middle of the night bathed in a cold sweat. Dread had settled in the pit of his stomach. Unable to sleep, he'd crept through the apple orchards back to his parents' house. He'd found his mom asleep on the porch, locked out of the house. She was curled up in the thin blanket his father gave her when she was bad. He'd wanted to go to her, to help, to get her the hell away from his father. But she didn't want his help. Leave him alone, Dallas. Do you hear me? She'd been the one who'd kicked him out of the house for trying to protect her. How dare you hit your father? Get out, Dallas. Get out and don't ever come back. A second armed soldier stepped out of the Greyhound. Then another, and another, and another. Logic told Dal they were probably just regular U.S. Army guys. Everyone knew President Reagan was beefing up the military in case they went to war with Russia. Maybe these guys were here to recruit kids from the campus. Maybe. Whatever the case, the physical sensation in the pit of his stomach told him something was off. He didn't know what it meant, just that something was wrong. The protective instincts of his childhood kicked in. He turned on his heel and hurried back the way he had come. His only thought was to get back to his car. When he heard the first gunshot, he flattened himself to the ground. Screams assaulted his ears. A glance over his shoulder showed him students streaming away from the lawn area. The soldiers moved into their midst, opening fire. Dal didn't wait to see more. He crawled around the corner of a building. Out of sight of the soldiers, he jumped to his feet and sprinted toward the parking lot. Lena! Her name flashed through his brain. Lena! He had to get to her. She was at the rally, exposed in the open, with no one to watch her back. Green flashed in his periphery. He looked up to see a soldier running between two buildings, right toward Dal. He spun around, sprinting back the way he'd come. A clatter of red darts followed him across the pavement. What the hell? He risked a look over his shoulder. The soldier held two large weapons. The first was a machine gun. The second held a large cartridge that was loaded with the small red darts. Dal tore back around the corner. "Don't go that way!" he shouted at a group of students rushing past him. No one listened. They streaked past him in a big clump. He heard screams as they ran into the soldier. Dal didn't turn back around. Lena. He had to get to Lena. If anything happened to her, it would break Mr. Cecchino. He vaulted over a hedge, cut around the cafeteria, past the science building, and bolted into the parking lot. Soldiers were everywhere. Dal dropped to his knees and rolled beneath a car. Right before his head disappeared beneath the Chevy, he saw the large red star, sickle, and hammer emblazoned on the back of a soldier's fatigues. Russians! Soviets! We're under attack! His panic ratcheted up several more notches. Lena! Everyone had been so focused on nukes, yet here were Soviets on American soil, launching a ground assault. His car was 3 rows away. There was screaming and gunfire. Several bodies were on the ground, bleeding all over the blacktop. Dal army crawled his way through the parking lot, staying beneath cars when he could. 2 pairs of Vans-clad feet raced by in front of his face. Seconds later, dark military boots raced past. Dal poked his head out in time to see the Soviet fire red darts at the fleeing students. He dove beneath the next car, continuing his way across the parking lot. Russians attacked with both regular guns and dart guns. There didn't seem to be any method to the attack except to sow fear and chaos. He wasn't sure which fate was worse, being gunned down or being hit with a Russian dart that contained who the hell knew what. His elbows were bleeding by the time he reached his Blue Beetle. The knees of his jeans were ripped. Somewhere along the way, he'd lost his backpack. Thank God he always kept his keys in his pocket. Crouching beside the car, he fumbled them into his hands. Once inside, he bent below the steering wheel and assessed the parking lot. It was pandemonium. Soviets were everywhere. Students raced every which way in a blind panic, many of them plucking red darts out of their bodies. There were dead everywhere. The campus parking lot was a slaughterhouse. He shifted his gaze away from the junior college. He looked in the direction of the downtown plaza where he'd left Lena. It was no more than 10 blocks away, but soldiers were everywhere. He swallowed. He might not make it. He was going into the lion's den. Dal pursed his lips. It didn't matter if he died. If anything happened to Lena, he couldn't live with himself. And what about Mr. Cecchino? Dal didn't think he'd survive the loss of his daughter. He was going to find her, whatever it took. He would find her, protect her, and get her back to the farm. Mind made up, he jammed the keys into the ignition. He threw the car into reverse and zipped out of his parking space. 2 Soviets stood in the aisle. They turned at the sound of Dal's Beetle. He shifted into drive, ducked low, and floored it. He drove straight toward the invaders. Bullets ripped into his windshield. Glass flew everywhere. Dal didn't take his foot off the accelerator. He crashed right through the invaders. The fatigue-clad bodies flew up into the air. Dal didn't look to see where the Russians landed as he hazarded a look over the steering wheel. The rest of the aisle was clear. The beetle continued to rumble forward. As soon as he reached the end of the row, Dal drove right over the grass and sidewalk that bordered the parking lot. Glass shook free of the broken windshield as the beetle bumped over the curb. Dal noticed his hands were bleeding, but he felt no pain. All he felt was the adrenaline firing through his veins. He aimed for the road. The beetle rumbled over the sidewalk and thunked onto the street. Someone laid into their horn as Dal cut into oncoming traffic. Bullets rained down on the cars. Dal realized there were Russians on the buildings. They fired directly into the traffic. Shit! He swerved as the car in front of him veered to the right, cutting him off. His tiny car zipped past the vehicle as it crashed into a light post. He had just enough time to absorb the dead driver before his car shot past. His panic mounted. They're gunning us down like cattle. He'd gone no more than 2 blocks when a nearby minivan hit the curb and flipped. Brakes squealed all around him. Damn it! He threw the beetle into reverse. To his left was a narrow alleyway. It was empty, too narrow for most cars. He wasn't even sure his beetle would fit. Screw it, he had to try. Horns blared as he made a hard left, sending the beetle careening through oncoming traffic. A Datsun clipped his fender. The beetle fishtailed. Dal yanked on the steering wheel to straighten it out, then floored it. The little car zipped into the alleyway. The side view mirror on the passenger side snapped off. Sparks popped from the mirror on the right side. Bullets sprayed into the alleyway from the rooftops. Dal jerked his body sideways, attempting to steer and keep one foot on the accelerator at the same time. Several bullets punched into his seat, mere inches from his left ass cheek. The beetle burst from the alleyway and on to a downtown street. It was chaos to the power of 10. Invaders were in the streets and on the rooftops, shooting at anything that moved. The road clogged with cars and pedestrians, traffic at a standstill. Dal searched the scene, looking for a way through. It was no use. Unless he wanted to kill a bunch of Americans by running them over, the only way through was on foot. It was mayhem out there. There was no choice. He had to find Lena. He had to run straight into the maelstrom. He jumped out of the beetle and snatched up the metal lid to a garbage can. He hadn't competed in high school sports like Leo and Anton, but that wasn't because he wasn't athletic. On the contrary, a lifetime of hard work in the apple orchards, first on his parents' farm, then on the Cecchinos, left him in good shape. Positioning the garbage can in front of him like a shield, Dal plunged into the chaos. He cut around a clump of people and found himself face to face with a Russian. It was like being 5 years old and staring up at his father as he swung a punch. Dal's hackles went up. He wasn't a kid anymore. He reacted on instinct. Just as the man brought up his gun, Dal swung the garbage can lid. It smacked into the man's nose. Bone crunched. The Russian screamed. Dal kicked him in the balls and kept running. He dodged through the chaos and cut left around 6th Street. Lena was on 4th Street, 2 blocks to go. He didn't let himself consider the possibility that she might not be at the coffee shop. A bullet tore right through the side of the trash can lid. Shit. The thing was useless against bullets. He held on to it anyway and poured on another burst of speed. A group of people scattered in front of him. Poster board signs were trampled underfoot. Wage peace. Nuclear war. Just say no. Take the toys away from the boys. Nuclear weapons. May they rust in peace. These were people from the rally. Was Lena among them? Dal barely registered that he was running into the crowd. He was too busy scanning their clothing, looking for Lena's fluorescent pink shirt and side ponytail. A woman ran smack into his chest, almost knocking him over. He spun sideways, only to find another Russian. The man had a long mustache and was 10 yards away. He sprayed red darts into the crowd, a wicked grin on his face. With a roar, Dal rushed the man, holding the trash can lid in front of him like a battering ram. Darts plinked into the metal. He banged the front of the trash can lid right into the man's face. The Russian staggered. Dal didn't let up. He swung the lid, smashing the side of the man's face. His cheekbone crumbled. Blood spurted everywhere. Dal was sucked back to a time when he was 9 years old. It was the first time he threw a punch at his old man. His dad had his mom on the floor, kicking her in the ribs. 9-year-old Dal decked him in the side of the face. Even then, his upper body strength had been primed from years of climbing apple trees. He'd hit his dad so hard, he'd broken his nose. Blood had sprayed everywhere, just like it sprayed out of the Soviets' smashed cheekbone. That was the first time his mother had ever turned on him, the first time she had defended his father instead of Dal. "Leave him alone, Dallas. Do you hear me?" Dal ran. Just like he had when he'd been 9 years old, he turned tail and ran. Another 2 blocks of dodging and weaving and pure luck had him at the alleyway behind 4th Street. And there she was, Lena. Her pink shirt was torn. Blood spattered her face and clothing. She had a broken chair leg in her hand, fending off 2 leering Russians with the tenacity of a bobcat. She squared off in the alleyway against them. They called to her in cajoling tones. Dal didn't need to understand Russian to know what they were saying. Rage boiled up in him. It was white-hot. His vision tunneled. All he could see was Lena and the invaders. He charged down the back alley like a kamikaze pilot. Just as the Russians registered him, he threw the garbage can lid like an oversized frisbee. It spun through the air and clocked the foremost of the Russians in the face. The man reflexively fired his weapon, but bullets sprayed harmlessly into the sky as he toppled backward. Lena took advantage of the momentary distraction to attack the second Russian. Her chair leg smacked him in the temple. The man dropped. Dal didn't have time to contemplate his next move. All he knew was that Lena was in danger, and he had to protect her. As the man dropped from the blow to the temple, Dal struck. His converse came down on the man's neck. He stomped. Hard. It wasn't so different from crushing a spider. Lena darted past him toward the man who had been struck with the garbage can lid. She swung the chair leg down like an axe. She hit him over and over again until blood coated the pavement. She screamed wordlessly, tears streaming down her face. "Lena!" He grabbed her by the shoulders. "Lena, he's dead!" "Dal!" She dropped the chair leg and threw her arms around him. Her chest heaved as sobs overtook her. He held her close, crushing her against him. Relief at finding her alive washed over him like a balm. "You came." Her voice came out ragged. "I was so scared." Of course he came. She didn't really think he'd have left her, did she? "Are you okay?" He gently gripped either side of her face, forcing her to look up at him. "Yeah." Her eyes were wild, but he saw Cecchino grit in them. "I'm okay." "We have to get out of here. My car is a few blocks away. Can you run?" She nodded, mouth set in a firm line. She pulled a handgun from the belt of one of the dead Russians, knuckles white around the handle. "I'll kill any of those assholes who try to hurt us." He flashed her a grin, liking her train of thought. He kicked aside his trash can lid and grabbed a weapon of his own from a dead Russian, a machine gun. He'd never used a machine gun before, but he'd used plenty of rifles throughout his life. He'd never shot a Russian before either, but he'd shot plenty of wild pigs. Killing Russians couldn't be that different. Grabbing Lena's hand, he led her out of the alleyway at a dead run. Chapter 7. Pole Mountain. Adjoining the Cecchino apple farm were 200 acres of wilderness. Grandpa Cecchino had believed in investing in land, even if said land had been too steep and hilly to convert into apple orchards. Land is the only thing you can't make more of, he used to say. The steep, forested hillsides were covered with oak, manzanita, madrone, and bay leaf trees. Between the trees were clearings of yellow grass and late summer wildflowers. Leo had grown up hunting in these woods with his family. Between deer and wild pigs, they kept the family freezers stocked with meat. That's where Leo had gotten the idea to start offering guided hunts on the family land. After he lost the football scholarship senior year, which had been the same time apple prices took a hit in the market, he started running ads in newspapers up and down Northern California. They'd only done a dozen or so guided trips every year, but every one of them had been successful and lucrative. The cabin, as the family called it, was an old converted lookout station built in the early 1900s. Its original function had been a wildfire lookout tower. It sat on the tallest hill in the county, known as Pole Mountain, and was in the heart of the Cecchino property. The cabin sat on stilts. It had been a single room that Grandpa Cecchino had expanded over the years. It now boasted 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, a small kitchen, and sitting room. Each of these bedrooms had 3 bunk beds, meaning they had enough beds for 12 people. A lot of their hunting customers preferred camping and would pitch tents outside, but plenty of them used the bunk rooms too. The road to the cabin wasn't easy to find. It was at the very back of the apple orchard, the entrance hidden behind several large bay trees that had fallen down a hillside in a heavy rain a few years ago. Even if a person knew where to look, the living trees shielded the rest of the road from sight. Leo switched into 4-wheel drive as he steered the truck up the 20% grade. The road up to Pole Mountain was 7 miles long and uphill almost the entire way. The land fell away around them as he navigated the dirt road, doing his best to avoid the potholes and long channels made by rainwater. The sun was low in the horizon, bathing the land in lavender and yellow light. Frogs and other evening insects were already out, filling the air with forest sounds. It was odd to think that, less than 15 miles away, a different world existed. A world under attack by Russians. What was going on in the rest of the country? How big was the attack? Was the U.S. Army on its way? "Those fuckers!" Lars said, voice drifting on through the open window of the back cab. "They can't get away with this." Leo slid a glance over at his grandmother. She didn't tolerate bad language. Her mouth tightened, but to his surprise, she didn't reprimand Lars. Leo took this as a bad sign. "They won't get away with this," Anton said. "This is America. People don't get away with attacking us." "Did Bruce manage to get in touch with any of your parents?" Leo called. There had been so much commotion that he'd lost track of the kids' attempts to make phone calls. "No one answered," Bruce said. "Every line was busy. It was like the phones were disconnected or something." Leo didn't say anything. Bruce Lars and Adam all lived in town, within walking distance of Bastapole High. "Do you think I should have tried to get back to my house?" Lars asked. "It was a war zone in town." Leo didn't say that Lars likely wouldn't have survived a trip back into town. "Your parents would want you to be safe." No one said anything after that, a subdued air settling over them. Leo thought of Lena and Dal and Rossi, and his dad driving into the city to find them both. "We need a radio." Anton banged on the cab with his fist. "Leo, turn on the radio. See if you can find out what's going on." Nona, who hadn't said a word since they left the farm, leaned forward and flicked on the radio. She turned up the volume so Anton and the boys in the back could hear. The monotone blare of the emergency broadcast system washed over them. "This is a message from the emergency broadcast system. All systems are down. This is a message from the emergency broadcast system. All systems are down." Nona spent the next 5 minutes turning the dial, trying to find a live station. Nothing. It was either static or the emergency broadcast message on repeat. Leo exchanged a tight look with his grandmother as she switched off the radio. This wasn't good. The boys in the back must have been thinking the same thing. "Shit," Lars breathed. "We are so fucked." Anton socked him in the shoulder. "Don't say that. We're the fucking United States. Those Soviet rat bastards can't get the better of us." "Language," Nona snapped. "Sorry," Anton said. "We are the darn United States. No one can mess with us." It was big talk. Leo wished he felt it. Inside, all he felt was dread. He thought back to the last few years when their mom had been alive. She went through the newspaper every day, combing it for anything that had to do with Russia and the Cold War. She kept an envelope full of clippings. Shortly before she was diagnosed with cancer, she'd purchased the Russian language tapes. "If the Russians make a move, this family will be ready," their mom had said. "At least one person in this household will know how to speak Russian." They were the same tapes Lena now carried everywhere. He remembered how sick the chemo had made his mom, how all her hair had fallen out, and how she'd been reduced to skin and bones. Near the end, she almost stopped eating entirely. Nona's pureed chicken noodle soup was the only thing she could keep down. "My baby boy." It was one of the last things she'd ever said to him. "I hope they don't institute the draft again." She had grabbed his hand. It was frail and thin and bony. Leo would never forget the way her hand felt in his. That had been 2 weeks before she died. It had been like holding a pile of sticks. "My baby boy, I hope they don't institute the draft again." Despite the illness that devastated her body, her mind remained sharp until the end. She read those damn newspapers every day. She never stopped adding clippings to her envelope. He missed his mom. Most days he avoided thinking about her altogether. That was easier than remembering how much he missed her. Today, for the first time since she'd died, he felt relief. Relief that she hadn't lived to see her worst fear become a reality. No nukes had been launched yet, but an invasion on American soil was just as bad. The cabin came into view. Leo pulled the truck to a stop in front of the dark brown wood building. He felt a sense of finality as he set the brake and switched off the car. He jumped out of the truck in time to see Anton prodding Lars. "Lars?" Anton patted his friend's shoulder. "How you doing, man?" Lars turned his head to look at Anton. Shit. In the 20-minute drive, Lars had become worse. His pupils were dilated, the irises streaked with red. The front of his shirt was dark with sweat. "Nona!" Anton called. "Lars is sick." Nona hustled around the side of the pickup. She took one look at Lars and pursed her lips. Her hand touched his forehead and the back of his neck. "He's burning with fever." "He was hit with the Russian darts," Anton explained. "Some of the Russians had machine guns, but lots of them had these dart guns." "Russian poison," Nona spat. "Get him inside. I'll do what I can for him." Anton jumped off the truck to help Adam. With Bruce's help, the two boys half-dragged, half-carried Adam up the stairs that led into the cabin. "Both linebackers down," Leo muttered. He helped Lars off the back of the truck, slinging an arm around his neck to keep him upright. Lars doubled over coughing. His legs nearly collapsed when he slid off the back of the truck. He was looking worse by the second. Leo tightened his grip on Lars. They were both over 6 feet tall, but Lars had an extra 75 pounds on him. They made a slow trek across the hand-packed dirt and paused below the dozen steps leading up the cabin. Lars looked at the steps like they were a sick joke. "Remember that workout Coach Brown made you guys do on Labor Day?" Leo asked. He'd heard all about it from Anton. He pretended not to listen, even though he'd filed away every detail. Lars tried to laugh. The sound turned into a wheeze. "The one where we almost died of heat stroke?" "Yeah. I know you feel bad right now, but you can't feel any worse than you did after that Labor Day workout." Anton had puked his guts out when he got home. Lars wheezed again. A trace of a smile pulled at his mouth. Leo saw determination crease his brow. Good. There was still fight in him. One step, then another. Leo grabbed the railing as Lars swayed. He kept them both from tumbling down the stairs. He hunched forward, dragging Lars up another few steps. "6 more, man," Leo murmured. "There's the end zone. Time to clear the way." Lars turned his head, coughing. He surged forward, taking the last 6 steps in a rush. He nearly collapsed at the top. Leo locked his knees, keeping him upright. "Sick kids in the south room." Nona had the first aid kit open on the long kitchen table. Leo obeyed, dragging Lars into the south bunk room. Adam was already there, flopped on his back and sound asleep. Anton was in the tiny closet, pulling out extra blankets. Leo eased Lars into the second bottom bunk. He ripped off the boy's dirty shoes, while Anton heaped blankets onto his shivering form. "He needs a doctor," Anton said. "I know." Leo shook his head. "But we can't risk taking him into a war zone in this state." "Sit him up." Nona bustled into the room with 2 aspirin and a glass of water. Anton helped her administer the medicine. Lars let out a soft growling sound as he swallowed the pills. Leo, who stood behind Lars while he downed the aspirin, felt his chest constrict as he got a good look at the back of Lars's neck. "Nona." Nona took one look at his face and shifted to stand beside him. Leo pointed to the back of Lars's neck. The black welts from the dart wound had grown to the size of a large coin. Several veins around the wound had also turned black, snaking up into his hairline across the back of his neck. Nona shook her head, lips pursed. "We watch him. It's all we can do now." She moved away and roused Adam. The other boy was drunk from the grappa and the pain, but Nona managed to get 2 aspirin down his throat. She hustled Leo, Anton, and Bruce out into the main room, quietly closing the bedroom door behind them. "Lars looks bad," Leo said. "Rest is the best medicine for the 2 of them," Nona replied. We've done as much as we can." Anton and Bruce flopped into a worn leather sofa, looking like they'd been run over by a truck. Leo didn't feel any of his normal animosity toward his little brother. The poor kid had gone from a routine football practice to a Soviet invasion. Lars was sick, and Adam had been shot. How many of his friends on the team had been killed? Leo gripped his shoulder. "You okay?" Under normal circumstances, Anton would have bristled at this. But today wasn't a normal day. "I'm worried about Dad and Lena," he said. "And Dal." Leo flopped into the chair across from him. "I'm worried about them too." There wasn't anything else to say. Leo wanted to say his family would make it back from Rossi, that they were strong and capable. And they were. But this was a Russian invasion. Nothing was a guarantee, as evidenced by all that had happened to Lars and Adam. "You think it's time to put your feet up?" Nona marched over to them. "There's a truck to be unloaded, boys. Move!" Leo flashed a wry grin at Anton and Bruce before levering himself up. He led the boys outside to unload all the gear from the truck.
If you're enjoying Zommunist Invasion, be sure to sign up for the VIP bunker. Inside, you'll find an exclusive Zommunist Invasion origin story not available anywhere else. You can join the bunker by heading over to my website at www.camillepicott.com. Thanks so much!